Hello, and welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. I hope you're having a good day so far, and that you're having a wonderful start to your new year. For this upload, we will be reading Exodus chapter 33. And the Lord said unto Moses, Depart, and go up hence, thou, and the people which thou hast brought up out of the land of Egypt, unto the land which I swear unto Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, Unto thy seed will I give it, and I will send an angel before thee, and I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite unto a land flowing with milk and honey, for I will not go up in the midst of thee, for thou art a stiff-necked people, lest I consume thee in the way. And when the people heard these evil tidings, they mourned, and no man did put on him his ornaments. For the Lord had said unto Moses, Say unto the children of Israel, Ye are a stiff-necked people. I will come up into the midst of thee in a moment, and consume thee. Therefore now put off thy ornaments from thee, that I may know what to do unto thee. And the children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments by the Mount Horeb. And Moses took the tabernacle and pitched it without the camp, afar off from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation. And it came to pass that every one which sought the Lord went out unto the tabernacle of the congregation, which was without the camp. And it came to pass, when Moses went out into the tabernacle, that all the people rose up and stood, every man at his tent door, and looked after Moses until he was gone into their tabernacle. And it came to pass, as Moses entered the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses. And all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tabernacle door. And all the people rose up and worshipped, every man in his tent door. And the Lord spake unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend, and he turned again into the camp. But his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, departed not out of the tabernacle. And Moses said unto the Lord, See, thou sayest unto me, Bring up this people, and thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast also found grace in my sight. Now therefore, I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, shew me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is my people. And he said, My presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. And he said unto him, If thy presence go not with me, carry us not up hence. For wherein shall it be known here that I and thy people have found grace in thy sight? It is not in that thou goest with us, so shall we be separated, I and thy people, from all the people that are upon the face of the earth. And the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken, for thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. And he said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee, and will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will shew mercy on whom I will shew mercy. And he said, Thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live. And the Lord said, Behold, there is a place by me, and thou shalt stand upon a rock. And it shall come to pass, while my glory passeth by, that I will put thee in a cleft of the rock, and will cover thee with my hand while I pass by. And I will take away mine hand, and thou shalt see my back parts, but my face shall not be seen. Summarizing Exodus chapter 33, God tells Moses to take the Israelites and leave the land, to go to the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God says that he'll send an angel to drive out the current occupants. He tells Moses, Go to this land flowing with milk and honey, but I won't travel with you. You're a rebellious people, and I might consume you on the way. Verse 4. When the Israelites heard this message, they mourned. They didn't wear their ornaments. And mourn means to express grief or sorrow. An ornament is defined as a useful accessory, a manner or quality that adorns, or an embellishment. Verse 5, God tells Moses the Israelites are rebellious. He says, I will travel with you for a moment and I would consume you. Take off your jewelry and I'll decide what to do with you. Verse 6, the Israelites took their ornaments off. Verse 7, Moses took the tabernacle and put it far from the camp. Anyone who wanted to talk to the Lord would have to go in. When Moses went in the tabernacle, everyone stood up. They watched Moses go inside. The cloud pillar that was mentioned in Exodus chapter 13, verse 22, when God was manifesting himself as a cloud pillar by night, or a cloud pillar by day and a pillar of fire by night, that was mentioned in Exodus chapter 13, verse 22. And then here in this instance, after Moses goes into the tent, this cloud pillar that God manifests himself in fell on the tent while Moses was in there. Verse 11, God speaks to Moses face to face as he does a friend. So that's just mentioning uh, their rapport. He has a really good rapport with Moses. Then Moses would return to the Israelites. Joshua went in the tent with him and didn't leave. Verse 12 starts out saying, one day Moses tells God that he says to, so he talks to God. He tells God, hey, you tell me to lead these people or bring these people up, but you're not clear on which people you want me to lead. And then Moses tells God that God says he knows Moses by name, and Moses has found favor with him. And he says, God, if I have found favor with you, please teach me your ways so that I can find your grace. Consider that this nation is your people. Verse 14, God responds that his presence is with Moses and that he will give Moses rest. Verse 15, Moses asks God to not send them away from the land if he's not going to go with them. Moses continues, asking, how can they be distinguished as a people without God's favor? In verse 7, God says he'll do what Moses asks and that he regards Moses favorably, that God does know him by name. Verse 18, Moses asks God to show him his glory. In verse 19, God says he'll make his goodness pass before him and call out his name before Moses. God says that he'll be gracious to who he chooses and compassionate to who he chooses. Verse 20, God tells Moses that he can't see God's face and live, but there's a place near me where you can stand on a rock. I'll hide you with my hand when my glory passes by, and you will be allowed to see my back, but not my face. I was going to make a comment, but I'm not going to. Okay. Highlights for Exodus chapter 33. God says that he'll send an angel to lead the Israelites in verse 2. And just examining the purpose of angels, or maybe not their purpose, but angels have been mentioned. They carry out tasks for God, but it also seems like they have more power than a human would have, which makes sense. So they interact with humans as leaders or guardians. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 2, in Exodus chapter 3, verse 2, an angel appears to Moses in a flame of fire out of a bush. But that's a segue for God to speak to him in verse 4. In Genesis chapter 19, there were two angels in the infamous story about Lot. Two angels taking the forms of men appeared to Lot because they were sent to destroy Sodom in verse 13. And the angels, two separate times, they protected Lot and grabbed him in verse 10 and verse 16. And then they also had the ability to blind the men who surrounded Lot's house with blindness. And then in this chapter that we're in, Exodus chapter 33, An angel will be assigned to lead the Israelites to the land promised to their ancestors. The second highlight, uh, I don't have complete clarity on this, but this was a question mark when I read it. In verse 4, the Israelites heard the message that God did not want to travel with them. They mourned and did not want to wear their ornaments. And mourn meaning expressing grief or sorrow, ornaments meaning useful accessory, quality that adorns or embellishment. And after after the Bible says they didn't want to wear their ornaments in verse 4, in verse 5, God tells them that they're rebellious and to take off their ornaments using the same word, ornament. So I don't have complete clarity on that. That doesn't really make sense to me, but that's what it says. And that was something that is a point that I mulled over trying to find an answer to, but I didn't. So um, moving on to the next highlight. The next highlight is a question. How should God be perceived? Because sometimes with depictions of God, especially in cartoons or shows or, the way that things are depicted in our media or in art, it comes from somewhere. And humans tend to hold an idea that we can conceive who God is. We can begin to understand who he is. He's a complete entity that's succinct and, tangible in some way. But this chapter just, the way that God is manifesting himself, he's not manifesting himself as a being. He's manifested himself as just different ways. So in verse 5, chapter Exodus chapter 33, verse 5, God says that the Israelites are rebellious, that if he travels with them a moment, he will consume them. So consume means to destroy, to devour, to engross, and engross means to engage fully. The word engage means to attract and hold by the influence of power. Another synonym for consume is perish. So God says if he travels with them a moment, he will consume them. Um, and this is I'm keeping in mind this is written in antiquated English, which is why it benefits the reader to have several versions of the translation, several translations available at your fingertips. That's why BibleRef.com is a really good tool to use, because you can get 5 translations for every single verse in the Bible. But he's saying if he travels with them for a moment, he will consume them. It just, I know this can be read as they will invoke his anger, so he will get so angry and just consume them. But when we look at how God has been manifested in these other areas, he's manifested himself sort of as a force instead of as an entity that can control himself the same way that we can understand. For instance, in verse 18 in Exodus chapter 33, Moses asked God to show him his glory. And glory is defined as a distinguished quality or asset. There are several definitions for glory, but the reason why this definition makes the most sense is because God's response is, you can't see my face, but you can see my back. So when we look here at the term glory, we do see that it's praise, honor, distinction, worshipful praise, honor, thanksgiving. We see that there's all these other definitions of glory. But the reason why I'm saying in this verse it is a distinguished quality or asset is because we look at what God's response is. when he says, "Show me your glory," and God says, "You can't see my face, but you can see my back down here. You should see my back parts. You can't see my face, but you can see my back." So the only definition, if you insert the way that you can tell what definition is being used is you insert it in place of the word. So it wouldn't make sense to say, "Please show me thy thanksgiving, honor, praise. Please show me your great gratification or achievement." That wouldn't make sense if God is responding, you can't see my face, but you can see my back." So, um, so I'm saying here that's not, that's what the term glory means. Also, this is BibleRef.com. If we look at Exodus chapter 33, verse 18, you see you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 translations. I say 5 because I already have the King James book. And this is BibleGateway.com. These are the resources that I use when I read. But the point is, so God says you know, you can't see my face, but you can see my back, because a man can't see my face and live. We look at verse 9, and Moses went to talk to God in the pillar enclosure, and the cloud, that God was leading them by, descends on the tabernacle while he's talking to God. And then other instances of God manifesting himself, Exodus chapter 24, verse 17, he manifested himself in the cloud, and the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. Then in chapter 19, in the mountain, when Moses was going up to talk to God, God manifested himself as a voice, thunder, lightning, trumpet, fire, and smoke. So the reason why I just want to bring this up is because when we look again at chapter 33, verse 5, and he says, "I will consume them," and because they're a rebellious people, this could be, what if God is a force? And when he gets angry, or when he feels, when he feels angry, or when he's been disrespected, maybe it's much more severe because he's not an entity like a human is. Okay. I feel like that was a long process to make that point, but I'm glad I made it. So moving on. Lastly, the intimacy that Moses has with God. He tells God in verse 12 that he's unclear on what God's instructions are. He goes to the tabernacle and he tells God that he wants his favor and his glory, but he's unsure. You want me to lead these people, but I feel like I'm unsure. And he goes to God, and God tells him that, uh, he responds saying that you have my favor, Moses. He responds in verse 14. And this just, I'm going to keep bringing up Rebecca going to God about her difficult pregnancy, because she's one of the only characters and the only woman so far who sought God out for a problem that she had, instead of seeking out other means or doing something else. She sought God out in chapter 25, verse 22. And then in the very next verse, God answered her on why she was having a difficult pregnancy. And so having a being open and making the effort to have an intimate relationship with God, to where he responds, and these people know that it's God responding to them because he's familiar enough with God to know, is something that, this is the second time it's presented itself, or not the second time, it's presented itself more times than that, but this is something that can happen. And both in this chapter, Moses goes to God and tells him, "Hey, I have an issue. I'm not clear on some information that you've told me." So did Rebecca. She went to God. "Hey, God, I'm having this problem." Instead of how the Israelites treated Aaron, they didn't go to God. They didn't even think to seek out God, which that's another highlight too that I'd like to mention. Moses didn't grow up as a traditional Hebrew in the land of Egypt. He was not raised in slavery. He was adopted by a pharaoh, and he got to grow up more like an Egyptian. And so he has this different type of uh, critical thinking ability to open himself up to God in a way that the Israelites don't, or the other Israelites don't. They've been enslaved. And as soon as they didn't get an answer for 40 days, they had to create another God. And they couldn't even create it. They had to go get someone else to do it because that mindset of being enslaved and having a leader cracking a whip, it almost took away well, it did. It took away their ability to think for themselves without some leader. And even if they had to create a leader. So those are my highlights for Exodus chapter 33. The next upload will be Exodus chapter 34. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.